Please rewind this cassette.
Hey guys, welcome to Box Office Addict 89, where we're going to be discussing the just insanity that's been surrounding Charlie's Angels from the auteur Elizabeth Banks, director of the masterpiece Pitch Perfect 2. The pitches are back. This is a fucking disaster. I mean, it's funny that it's Sony because then it brings up Ghostbuster comparisons, which is what everyone's been doing. And of course, Elizabeth Banks had to make this worse by coming out and saying that men were too stupid to go see a movie with a feminist message or understand it. I don't know if that quote's true. That one looked fake as shit to me, but maybe I'm a boomer and I don't get it. The other factor to bring in here is that she said that other female action films that had done well, like Wonder Woman or Captain Marvel, played into a male genre, which are superhero films, and this is a female genre film. Now, I always thought of Charlie's Angels as like an action-adventure comedy sort of thing, so I thought that that was a genre that men like too, but I haven't seen this movie, so perhaps it is a female genre film. But I would say to her then, are you saying that women don't go see movies? Because if this still opened to $8 million, are you saying that's all the women that went to go see this? Because let's double it. Let's say this is 100% of the audience for this is female, which it was 61%, by the way. Let's say that. Then let's add another half. It's only a $16 million opening weekend if you equal it out. So it doesn't... This was never going to be a hit. That's what's obvious here, is that it was never going to do well. I don't want to blame Elizabeth Banks for this being a failure, and I also don't want to blame the stars, even though nobody gives a fuck about any of them, even Kristen Stewart. Or Kristen Stewart. Is it Kirsten Stewart or Kristen Stewart? I don't care. Jodie Foster's daughter in Panic Room. She's not a movie star. Quit act. Twilight was years ago, the Snow White movie. She's been in a lot of independent films over the last several years. She has not been in a major movie in a long time. She cannot open a movie. I don't think she ever could, really. I think Twilight opened well despite her, and I think it's obvious. The other two actresses, nobody gives a shit about them. There's going to be people on social media and Twitter being like, these women are amazing. I'm just in love with them. Nobody cares about them. They're not A-listers. There was apparently scripting issues with this, so they couldn't bring in big talent. Like, you couldn't get a Jennifer Lawrence or a Margot Robbie or an Emma Stone. They really didn't get A-list talent on this movie, and I think that affected it in a huge way. Because what are you selling it on? One actress that people know from Twilight, and then just the brand, the IP of Charlie's Angels, which I believe a few years ago they tried to do a Charlie's Angels television series that was unsuccessful and was canceled. So, yes, they did do that. So basically, it's just a dead IP. I mean, people are going to bring up the McG films, which both made like $250 million worldwide. But that felt like a big event movie, a blockbuster at the time, the first Charlie's Angels. I remember when it came out. And Cameron Diaz was a big star. Drew Barrymore was a big star. Lucy Liu was very popular at the time. They were all huge sex symbols. So I don't, they were all iconic at that point. Like, I mean, There's Something About Mary had come out. It was a huge hit. Luke Wilson was in the movie. I mean, it had this comedy angle to it besides being an action film. It was just very much of its time, that McG film, even in the way how it looks. Although Sam Rockwell dancing in that movie is fucking phenomenal. And Crispin Glover's in that movie. So I actually give McG a lot of credit for making a movie with those two. Excuse me. I don't know what Elizabeth Banks is doing. This feels so outdated. This feels like some kind of point that would have been made like 5 years ago. That I made a female movie, an action film like this, and nobody went to go see it. I mean, it's crazy that she would say this today. Because I think what's obvious here with this, and with Dr. Sleep, which is also doing poorly, is that streaming, I think, has finally went over that place where it took over. People have been thinking it's going to happen over the last few years. I don't think it's a coincidence that Disney Plus is launching right now when this is all happening. People will go see a big movie that's got a very specific audience to it that it could blow up with, like Joker. like the Marvel movies or like the number one movie of this week, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But to try to launch these middle tier films that maybe a few years ago would have done decent, there's no place for them in the market anymore. Dr. Sleep should have been on Netflix, and Charlie's Angels should have just been dead. But if you're going to do it, yeah, do it on a streaming platform or try to do a series on a streaming platform. That's all you really have. This is not going to be a $100 million hit. The best they could have hoped for was this movie opening at like $25 million, maybe making $90 million domestic. So with a budget that's $48 million, although I've read it's higher than that, and $50 million in a marketing campaign, which was originally $100 million, so Sony knew that this wasn't going to be a big hit. You have over $100 million in this movie. And worldwide, let's say, even if it has a huge international pool, it's not going to make more than, let's say, $150 million, which I think is crazy if it would make that. So there's no break-even point. This is a flop, straight up. And everyone's trying to point fingers. Elizabeth Banks comes across as very insecure and defensive, and it's hard to see her this way because I like Elizabeth Banks. I like her as an actress. And I just can't believe she's doing this. Maybe it's because her and Stewart put so much stock in like this feminist thing and being progressive, and then just to get shot down like this is so defeating. Maybe it hurts them both so much, because you don't say that kind of stuff unless you're really like upset. Because if this movie had been a hit, Elizabeth Banks wouldn't be coming out everywhere and feeling the need to defend it. And because she's done this, it's created the opposite side gaining traction. I'm seeing YouTube videos now from, anti-SJW type YouTubers or people who always like to complain about feminism in films or SJWs, and they're getting videos with hundreds of thousands of views just because of what Elizabeth Banks has done. If she would have just not talked about this, it could have come out bombed, and it would have just went away. It would have just went, hey, this was a bad movie to produce. I blame the producer, whoever greenlit this movie. They're the one that should be getting blamed for this. It was a bad idea. You should have just stopped it and not lost your money on it. Instead, this is going to become some big deal, which might be part of the plan, create this controversy in hopes that it'll get people to go see the movie. But this is no Joker. Speaking of that, Joker did pass $1 billion and has a $700 million international pool. This movie has made $1.018 billion worldwide. It's another DC billion-dollar film. It's the first R-rated film to ever make $1 billion, so it is now officially the highest-grossing R-rated film of all time. It's also going to be one of the most profitable superhero films with a budget of $55 million. So this is like one of the only films from another studio that wasn't Disney this year to actually have a significant hit. One that keeps a studio alive for another year, because there's no way they're not making like $500 million off that movie. Let's talk about Midway for a second from Lionsgate. Still only made $34 million so far, $54 million worldwide. I believe the budget is like $85 million, $100 million. Still hasn't broke even yet. Dr. Sleep is at $24 million domestic and $53 million worldwide on a $50 million budget. So that's just another fucking, just like this is what I'm trying to get at. We're seeing that there's no middle market anymore. It's like AAA titles and video games and then indie games. You'll have the little indie art house film that'll do surprisingly well, like a Parasite or Jojo Rabbit's out there right now, and they're about getting Oscar nominations. And then you'll have something like like Zombieland that does well, but outside of that, there's no like the $100 million grosser. We're not seeing a lot of that. Something like Good Boys was able to be in that market, but it's very rare. We don't get. I remember even just like a decade ago, you would get movies like An I Love You Man or 1408 that would make $70 million domestic, and over $100 million worldwide, and they were a modest hit for the studio, and they didn't cost too much. You don't see as many of those movies anymore. The kept at a pretty conservative budget, and then they make a decent profit, and then they do well on home video, and they stick around for a little while. Just those little movies that get released throughout the year. You're not seeing that much anymore, and I think it's just a sign of the times. But on the opposite end of Charlie's Angels doing so poorly, and what that's turned into, we have to look at Ford versus Ferrari, which this was just a surprise. Nobody thought this was going to open this well. I think the highest estimations were like 20 million. This is from James Mangold, who's coming off momentum from Logan, and it was very good to back him on something like this. Christian Bale and Matt Damon usually don't open movies very well that aren't franchise films. There's exceptions to this, like American Hustle, which is an ensemble, or The Martian. But for the most part, both of them have been in films that have done very poorly. Or just very mediocre. I mean, they don't open, and nobody really opens movies anymore, if we're being honest. There's maybe a handful of actors who can open a movie. But this shows the opposite of Charlie's Angels, where there was no market for it, there was no demographic for it. A very small one. Here's a movie for car enthusiasts. Here's a movie for history buffs. Here's a movie for people who want a race movie, you know, which we thought was kind of a dead genre because Rush didn't do well a few years ago, and even before that, it was a genre that was, you know, Fast and Furious is different. We're talking like a traditional, like, people racing around a track sort of thing. That hasn't done well in a long time, maybe since Ricky Bobby. But here you have a movie for all these different demographics: an older audience, a male audience. I could still see teenagers going to see this just to see these two actors play off each other. Now, it does have a big budget. This was an expensive movie at $100 million, but considering people thought that it was going to open at, you know, 18 to 20 million and then have to build off word of mouth, this is a good sign that it has momentum. I think of The Revenant when it opened to like 39 million and then went on to make 183 million. This is right before the holiday season, Thanksgiving, we're going to go into Christmas. I think this is just actually a huge opening weekend in the context of what this is, which is an Oscar contender that's been well reviewed ever since it opened at, I believe, Venice is where it opened. Very acclaimed film, right? Yeah, I mean, not like The Irishman or Parasite or something, but well reviewed film, will no doubt get Oscar nominations. This $31 million opening weekend, I just see it as like next weekend, 20-something million. The weekend after that in the teens. I see this movie having a shot. As of right now, I could be totally wrong, but it has that A+ cinema score. It did better than what everyone expected. That's always a positive sign. This is going to play well during the holiday season. I could see this movie making like 130, 150 mil domestic. I really could. And I could definitely see it making 200, 250 million worldwide. I'm sure they're hoping for like 300 million, but let's just say 250 million worldwide. And even with its high budget, that it'll probably still do okay. I mean, like I said, this was an expensive movie. I'm not going to ignore that and be like, wow, it's a hit. You know, that would seem like a bad opening weekend for a $100 million movie to some people. But I don't think it is. I think this is a total surprise. I don't think the studio thought this was going to do as well as it did. This is a producer backing something that makes sense. They totally hit the markets that they wanted to hit. It's going to play well because it's going to get announced as number one. It's only being overshadowed on the internet just by everybody talking about Charlie's Angels, even though nobody went to go see that goddamn movie. And here's a movie that clearly has an audience. And this helps also really put Christian Bale and Matt Damon back in a place as movie stars. Both of them could get nominated. It's just a success story all around. It's really cool. It's really cool that James Mangold has a hit that isn't, you know, one of the X-Men movies or, you know, Walk the Line. I think this is honestly one of his better movies since like 3:10 to Yuma, and the confidence in the filmmaking here and where he's at as a filmmaker is a very exciting director to watch right now. It's just awesome. So it's very cool that one movie was a bomb even more so than anyone thought it could be, and then another movie turned into this surprise hit that nobody really saw coming. And that happening in the same weekend does show that, yes, while streaming is here and it is taking over the marketplace in a way where there is a market lacking for certain types of films, there's still movies that can do well in theaters with the right kind of audience and playing to a mature audience. Or films that people wouldn't expect to do well. I don't think people would have thought Downton Abbey to do as well as it did. And I think it's the same for this movie. I think people would think a movie like this wouldn't be a blockbuster. And also just putting two big name actors together in a movie, like when they put Leo and Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You can still sell a movie on that, seeing two actors together that, you know, it hasn't happened yet. Which Charlie's Angels is just lacking. Zombieland Double Tap has officially passed the first movie with 111 million worldwide, at least on a worldwide. It hasn't passed it domestically. And pretty much everything else is where it was. Terminator Dark Fate is doing horrible, 60% drop, 233 million worldwide. It won't make as much as Genesis. It's going to be the lowest grossing Terminator film domestically. I mean, the first film made like 38 million, but that was in the early 80s, so we're not going to really count that. So yeah, that didn't turn around. Maleficent is about at 500 million. Everything else isn't really worth mentioning. You know, Midway's in the middle, of course. And yeah, Lighthouse is you know, about to be done. Motherless Brooklyn is pretty much done, a 76% drop. Parasite's doing really well. Parasite's at 110 million worldwide, and it seems like it's going to make 20 million domestically, which is huge for a foreign film that does not happen often. Let's see where It Chapter 2 is at, if it made any more money. Box Office Mojo. We're in the process of updating the site right now. Try again in just a few minutes. Well, alright then. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys for episode 90.